What Ike Allen and Andy Anderson have created at AVAIYA is what the world needs.
Hello, AVAIYA family. I'm Andy Anderson. My partner Ike Allen and I are teachers, mentors, and the co-owners of AVAIYA University. AVAIYA is the creator of over 1,000 books, films, courses, teachings, and other supportive resources. Thank you so much for joining us. Our fellow teacher, Dr. Jake Porter, is with us today to talk about the neurobiology of betrayal trauma. Dr. Jake is a licensed professional counselor, national certified counselor, certified sex addiction therapist, and the creator of Couple-Centered Recovery, a model for treating attachment wounds of couples experiencing the trauma of betrayal. He has worked with couples from around the world who have traveled to Houston for treatment of severe attachment injuries and relational trauma. Jake has taught and presented research on the topics of theology, counseling, trauma, and addiction all around the world. And there are many, many other things I could tell you about him, but we'll get started. Welcome to AVAIYA, Jake.
Oh, thank you, Andy. I'm glad to be here.
Yeah, I'm glad to have you here. And I just scratched the surface of all your accomplishments and all the amazing things you're up to in the world. So we're excited to have you.
Yeah, this is great. I'm excited to talk about this topic. It's really important.
Yes, and you are such an expert in this area. So let's talk betrayal trauma, right? What is betrayal trauma? Where did that term come from?
Yeah, so betrayal trauma is it's a psychological experience that happens when someone discovers that they have been betrayed. And I mean, that sounds really basic, but it's important to understand it that way and to break it down like this. So trauma is what we experience anytime that we get too much too fast or too little for too long, right? Either one of those can put us in a state of trauma. And with betrayal trauma, what often happens is that all of a sudden, someone's story that they feel like they've known, relied on, counted upon, just assumed to be their reality shatters. And we'll get into the particulars later of exactly what that does to the brain. But what I'll say right now is it sends the brain into this sort of primal threat response and causes all of these symptoms and behaviors to come up. And that term is relatively new, betrayal trauma. It actually about 2005, I think it was, Dr. Barbara Steffens did her dissertation research on partners of sex addicts who discovered a hidden addiction and their reactions to it, their experiences to it. And it really revolutionized the field because prior to that time, people looked at this same group of folks who had had these experiences and called them things like codependent or co-addict. And that actually ended up heaping more trauma upon them through pathologizing their response.
Interesting. Yeah, I had no idea where that term actually where it came out of, and that it's not really been around for very long at all. Definitely hearing it more these days. But why do you think it's so important to understand betrayal as traumatic, right? Like, why do we need to get that this is actually a trauma that's happening?
Yeah, because for a long time, when we didn't understand that that's what was going on, we ended up doing more harm. Okay. And I'm not trying to like shame people who are, using old models from the past and all that. But now that we know better, we want to do better. Right. And so in the past, what would happen is sort of the AA template, 12-step AA template with alcoholics was imposed on partners of sex addicts. And while there are similarities and I'm not anti 12-step or anything like that, there are some really significant differences, such as though it's possible to hide being an alcoholic, it's a lot harder. It's not that hard to hide being a sex addict. And so the partners of sex addicts being kind of pushed into a model that called them co-addicts or codependents that implies and is actually built on them being responsible, them enabling the acting out behaviors in some way. When that was not their experience, they didn't have any idea what was going on. It actually would cause treatment-induced trauma on top of the trauma of the betrayal itself. And so for the sake of helping the individual who's been betrayed, but also their partner and the relationship, if the relationship is going to make it, approaching it through the lens of trauma is going to set them all up for better success in the end, because it's going to make sense of what's happening, all those behaviors, all those symptoms.
Interesting. Yeah. Thank you for, I've never thought about it in that way. And I know that you're right, pulling from that end of like a sex addiction and everything. And, of course I am well aware of 12-step groups and, right. I guess it's more Al-Anon, right. And Codependence Anonymous that would be addressing, the partner of someone who's an addict or an alcoholic. Is that also true of like sex addicts? If their partner is trying to seek help, do they have groups like that addresses that end of things?
Yeah. So there's COSA. So that would be codependents or co-addicts of sex addicts. COSA is sort of an Al-Anon style support for the partner of the addict. That's one. But in the last, how old is it now? Maybe 5 or 6 years, a new 12-step based group has developed called AVAIYA, which stands for Infidelity Survivors Anonymous, which is actually built on a trauma-informed model. And so rather than ascribing codependency to participants, it understands that that may not be the case for them. Now, here, I want to say, like, for some partners of sex addicts, that codependency model might fit and be really helpful. I'm not trying to bash it entirely, but for many, many partners, it doesn't. And is unhelpful and actually harmful.
Yes. Awesome. Thank you for addressing. Yes. For people it works for and who doesn't. Okay. So let's talk about, right, when a betrayal is discovered, right? When someone recognizes their partner, has betrayed them, like, how is it actually psychologically traumatic? What happens in the brain at that moment?
Okay, so a lot happens in the brain, but there are 3 really significant effects, very specific, particular significant effects that I like to teach folks. And I try to come up with some, like, memorable, cutesy sort of names for them, even though it's not a whimsical topic. It can help us remember, right? So the first part of the brain that gets affected is the corpus callosum. So if you got left and right hemispheres here, the corpus callosum is that part that connects the 2 hemispheres. It's right in the middle, connecting left and right hemisphere. And anytime there's trauma, this isn't specific to betrayal trauma, okay? Anytime there's trauma, the chemical dump that goes along with that, all the adrenaline and the cortisol and all of that stuff, one of the effects is that the functionality of the corpus callosum goes down, okay? So that now, as the brain is encoding this experience in its memory, the encoding happening in left and right hemisphere is not integrated, okay? It's not integrated, so it's isolated. Now, this is why that's significant. We have, the whole left brain, right brain thing can be really oversimplified and overstated, but basically, from a 30,000 foot view, we've got right mode dominant processing and left mode dominant processing that are significantly different. So your left mode dominant processing is going to be, I start with all the L's for left: language based, linear thinking, logical thinking. It's going to look at parts of things, and it's going to analyze, and it's going to see complexity and nuance, and it's going to have a sense of time, sequence, narrative, story. That's all left brain stuff. The left brain is also much slower and more conscious. Okay. So that's left brain. Right brain is just kind of, think of the polar opposite of all of those. Okay. So right brain, rather than being language based, it's sensory based. It's somatic. It's what you see, hear, smell, taste, touch, right? The actual literal senses. Also, because it's somatic, it's more emotional. We call emotions feelings because we literally feel them in the body, even if it's not conscious. Right brain is largely non-conscious. Very, very fast. Very, very fast as opposed to slow, like the left brain. It also sees the whole, and it has no words. It doesn't see parts. So that's how right brain works. Now, I know we're kind of getting in the weeds, but we're getting there. So when a memory is formed optimally, you have this balance of both of these systems working together. So I can remember what happened, when it happened, the chronology of it. I can look at different parts of it, but I can also recall the feelings, the sensations, more the emotional piece. Now, imagine what happens if the functionality of the corpus callosum connecting left and right goes down. So I call this the trauma trigger time warp, because now a right brain memory can get activated, and it's not anchored in time, in story, by the corresponding left brain memory network. So let's say a partner who's been betrayed discovered the betrayal by walking in and seeing her husband on the phone, and she busted him texting an affair partner, say. So 6 months later, she walks in a room and he's on the phone. That triggers this right brain memory. Her body responds like it's happening right here, right now, because there's no sense of time anchoring it to, oh, this is reminding me of back then.
Right.
And so that causes these intense reactions that trauma survivors often have, where, again, even outside the context of betrayal, right? I'm in a car accident that involved a Jeep. And so now I see a Jeep and my heart leaps, right? Because the memory isn't anchored in time. I'm reliving rather than remembering.
Right.
So that's the first way that betrayal affects the brain.
Can
I've
you
been
say-
talking a lot. Yeah.
No, say that name again. So the number one, you said trauma trigger, what?
The trauma trigger time warp.
Okay.
That's
got
the
it.
corpus callosum's functionality going
Okay.
down.
Okay.
That's right.
Interesting. Yeah. To actually really understand what's happening and why why we tend to relive that and re-traumatize ourselves after
Yeah.
thinking of a betrayal. Yes. Okay. Awesome. Well, could you go on to number 2?